Walt Disney once said that for every laugh there should be a tear, which is why I think, anyway, he would have loved Drawn to Life, that hugely entertaining, surprising, and emotional spectacle, which is now being presented live on stage at Disney Springs in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Presented by Cirque du Soleil and Disney, this is a show that I can guarantee you will captivate audiences of all ages. Drawn to Life is a must-see, family-friendly spectacle that will leave you, well, in awe. So don't miss out on your chance to be part of the magic. Plan your visit to Disney Springs today and reserve your seats for Drawn to Life by Cirque du Soleil and Disney live on stage. Set your imagination in motion.
Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish Podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Len Testa, and this is our show for the week of Schmurz Day, April 15th, 2024. On the show today, news, plus I try the new 1900 Park Fair Buffet, and listener questions. Then in our main segment, Jim gives us part 2 of the story of how Disney World's Tomorrowland came to be. Let's get started by bringing in the man who says that with all due respect to iced tea, sometimes it's okay to hate the player and the game. It's Mr. Jim Hill. Jim, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well, but I love that you folded in Grammy Award winner Ice-T in there. By the way, he has played Finn Tutuola in 456 episodes of Law and Order SVU, Len.
Yep. Is that where he's got most of his money from? It's got to be coming from residuals, right? Rather than music?
Gotta be. But I have to tell you that you know, for a time, SVU was my just before bedtime comfort food show. I could not honestly hit the hay without hearing Ice-T say, "That's messed up." By the way, Lisa Traeger and Kara Clank actually host the That's Messed Up it's an SVU podcast over at the Exactly Right Network, which is the home of my comfort food podcast, which is My Favorite Murder, with Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstock and SSDGM, folks.
What does that mean?
Stay sexy and don't get murdered.
You know, words to live by, Jim. I got to wake up every morning with that on my lips right there. Okay.
There we go.
It's a little pep talk I give myself in the mirror before coming downstairs. Fantastic. All right, Jim, let's do a quick shout out to subscribers. Thanks to everyone who subscribes to the show over at patreon.com/JimHillMedia, including MJS, Aaron LeBlanc, Melissa Iannetta, Dishman, Chet Manley, and Chris Payne. Jim, these are the Disney show producers trying their best to work misunderstood characters like Hades, Chernabog, and the Lumens into various acts around property. They say, for example, Hades has a wonderful singing voice, but the flame-proof underwear for the cast is proving to be a bit itchy and not at all flattering. So work continues. True story.
Again, I'm a big Hades fan myself.
Look, we would love to work you into this. We have some notes.
There we go.
Also, speaking of production, have you seen the video, Jim, going around about the filmmakers who recreated the Disney sodium vapor process that was used to do the effects in Mary Poppins?
Yeah, Drew Chandler actually brought this to my attention on the most recent fine-tuning, and it is fascinating. But the part of the story that intrigues me is, you know, they talk about how, they had 3 prisms.
Yeah, so the background here is sodium vapor lamps give off a very specific wavelength of yellow. And so you can use that kind of like as a green screen. But in order to split the screen from the things you actually want, you need very precisely engineered glass prisms to break apart the light spectrum. And they apparently cost, at the time, tens of thousands of dollars. So Disney made 3 of them and promptly lost them after Mary Poppins was filmed. So these guys recreated it. They actually re-engineered it using modern techniques and everything. It was kind of great.
I have to admit, for me, again, the geek that I am when it comes to Disney history is, if you think about, you know, and they cite, for example, the Jolly Holiday sequence in Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
But we jump ahead to 71. We have the Island of Nabumbu, beautiful briny thing from Bedknobs and Broomsticks. We have in 77, we have Pete's Dragon. And it's like, when did they last use those prisms? And, and how did they disappear? You would think.
Well, I mean, they're the size of a large piece of diced fruit. They probably got in someone's pocket, and it's on someone's desk right now as an interesting tchotchke.
There we go. There we go. Okay.
By the way, I love that I threw this little note in. It's literally the words Jim, Disney Sodium Vapor Process, YouTube. I threw this in like a minute before we started, and you riffed on it. That was great.
No. Thanks to Mr. Taylor for bringing it to my attention. But again, it's a fascinating 12 minutes.
It's a great video.
Go check it out.
Go watch it on YouTube, folks that are listening. Disney Sodium Vapor Process. Just Google that. First thing that comes up. It's kind of great. It's like Jim said, 12 minutes long. Really fun. All right, Jim, on to the news. The news is sponsored by touringplans.com. Touring Plans helps you save time and money at theme parks like Walt Disney World. Check us out at touringplans.com. All right, Jim, every show should begin with a round of self-congratulations. But before congratulations, corrections of sorts. On last week's show, when we were talking about the dark boat ride concept coming to Dinoland and Animal Kingdom, I read out some box office numbers to support my theory that although the concept art shows Moana as the theme for that ride, Moana didn't do as well at the box office as Encanto. So Encanto might be the more logical choice because it was more popular. And Jim, I was informed later by someone who definitely would know the interesting fact that since Moana has been on Disney Plus, it has never left the top 5 most streamed titles. So I don't know what I was thinking about Encanto, Jim. Moana is a wonderful choice for this part of the park, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, long story short, Len, I mean, face it, we're old dogs and we have to learn these new metrics. I mean, again, I used to, treat movie box office like ball scores, and now and in fact, it gets even crazier when you get over to the streaming services because they don't measure the success of a movie by how many times it's watched, but rather how many minutes?
Minutes. Yeah. It's a share of attention. Yeah. Share of attention.
That's it exactly. And it's just sort of like, okay, they watch 15 minutes of the movie. We got them, so I don't know.
The thing that I found interesting is like over the last couple of years, we've heard from senior executives at pretty much every major streaming service. Like, actually, we think this about this. Like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Cool. All right, on to the congratulations. So on several shows this year, starting with our January 1st show, we mentioned instances of what looked like questionable DAS usage in the parks, both from counting the number of people getting in lines and watching the occasional incident here or there. And we said that we would not be surprised to see Disney make some changes to its disability access service. And then last Tuesday, Disney announced major changes to its DAS program. The changes are this. Disney says it's returning back to the program's original target population, which is those with developmental disabilities that prevent them from waiting in line. They're moving to a third-party verification company who will do live video chats with you to determine the appropriate accommodation for your need. And the interesting thing there is Disney said that you could be able to schedule those up to 120 days in advance, which is double the 60 now. And the new program is good for 120 days, which is also double the current length. The other interesting thing is if you show up at the parks, you will not be speaking to guest relations about that. Instead, you'll be directed to a small room, apparently near guest relations, to have that video chat with the same company. So there's no getting around using that third-party company. And then kind of buried in this, Jim, did you see that Disney said that they're going to reconfigure the standby lines so that more people are able to get out and get in them?
Oh.
It was in the announcement, but here, let me give you the source. So a major source of DAS use is from people who say that they have gastrointestinal issues that cause them not to be able to wait in long lines because they have to go to the bathroom too frequently to wait in that line. So Disney's addressing this by modifying the standby queues at some unspecified but probably popular attractions to add a return to your place in line feature. And they haven't exactly said how they're going to do it, but my sense is you'll be able to, like, I don't know if they're going to carve up 2 lanes into 3 and make one of them an exit and come back, like a third lane or what, but the implementation of this is going to be interesting. Yeah. Also, Disney says that the service is now designed for a maximum group size of 4 friends, or whatever size your immediate family is, whichever is larger, and that's down from 6. So we're going to restrict the number. We're going to lower the number of people who qualify. We're going to lower the maximum group size, and for those who have issues that need going to the bathroom, there's another change coming for that. Okay. So the things that stay the same would be the way that you use MDE to set return times while you're in the park. So all of that's going to stay the same. and this takes effect May 20th in Walt Disney World and June 17th in Disneyland. If you've already registered under the current process and your trip is before then, Disney says you don't have to do anything. And I would expect us to hear more details around the very, very specific steps, like how's it going to work for someone with, non-apparent disabilities? How's it going to work for, people within wheelchairs and so on? So more of that is to come. But the interesting thing about this is, this announcement came out, and we knew it was coming, right? We knew it was coming. The number of phone calls I got that afternoon from the 407 area code providing background on this, that I'm not saying it came from Disney. I'm saying the information would be such that Disney would never say it out loud, right? So let me say this, right? So I know a lot of people have a legitimate need for the service, either for themselves or for their children or their parents. I'm convinced Disney knows the demographics of the groups most likely to abuse this system. And if you fall in that group I just mentioned, you are not the droids they're looking for. They know who they're targeting for this, right? So I wouldn't worry about that. So and change is hard and change is scary. I really don't think this new process is going to be substantially different for the vast majority of people who truly qualify, right? Who fall into this category, right? The other thing I want to mention is Disney has thousands of cast members who are either disabled or who have family members that are disabled. And if you told me this new policy went through 25 rounds of internal review and testing before we even heard about it, I would believe that. And the end result is going to be that the people who truly need accommodation are going to wait less in line when all of this is done, right? So that's the good thing.
No, I agree. The notion is Disney isn't going after your child with autism. There's an entirely different target in mind here.
Yeah. Let me just say this, and I'm not saying that this was told to me or anything, right? If you think that the best way to get a DAS pass is to show up at a park by yourself with no doctor's note, but a script that you printed off the internet that says words to use to skip the lines at Disney World for free, and you're reading from that paper to the person at guest relations, you might want to rethink your strategy. That's all I'm going to say on that topic.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
Words to the wise, Len.
Okay. I'm not saying it's happened or that Disney has 700 videos like that backed up. But anyway, going over some of the background information, and some of this we knew, some of this we learned, right? Here's why Disney had to make this change. DAS abuse has gotten out of hand. And again, Disney's not going to give actual numbers on it, but you and I can piece together some things based on what it has said in the past and what it's saying today. All right. So back in 2020, Disney was sued about ADA accommodations. And it was the U.S. District Court in Orlando. And the court found this data that Disney presented about the old guest assistance card persuasive. They said approximately 3.3% of guests at Disney use a guest assistance pass. But the percentage of guests on the most popular rides who have that guest assistance card and use the FastPass line was significantly higher than 3%. So the study that they did showed 3.3% of guests were 11% of riders on Space Mountain, 13% of riders on Splash Mountain, and 30% on Toy Story Mania in 1 week in April. And if you look at the overall numbers over the course of a vacation, Disney engineers said that guests with a guest assistance pass were riding Toy Story Mania. Remember when Toy Story Mania came out, it was super popular. People with guest assistant passes were riding Toy Story Mania an average of 10 times more than guests who didn't have a guest assistance card pass. Okay. And here's where it gets interesting. Disney said on Tuesday that the use of the DAS system had tripled in the last 5 years. And the DAS system allows you to bring up to 5 other people on the ride, and that's a really big multiplier effect for every instance of abuse. So multiplying the previous numbers that Disney's already said in a lawsuit, not by 3, right? They said it's tripled, but let's be conservative here and say 2.5, right? That means that 8 or 9% of guests with DAS cards and their groups are taking up to 75% of the seats on popular rides. And I will defend that, both of those numbers, Jim, very, very hard. I've got to those numbers through multiple estimates, and they seem to be consistent. So 8 or 9% of the guests are 75% of the people in the Lightning Lane lines. Okay. And that's in line with what we collected by counting the number of people in lines this year, right? I believe those numbers, right? I don't think Disney's ever going to say it. I believe those numbers. And the problem with that, right, is that, again, the people who legitimately need the accommodation are waiting in line longer than they should because of abuse. And remember that because we're going to come back to that later on.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Not for nothing, too. I haven't talked to anyone internally about this. I swear I've not talked to anybody about this. But, Jim, I would bet money that they looked at the upward trend in DAS use. And they looked at the June opening of Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And they were scared that pretty close to 100% of the Lightning Lane capacity for Tiana's would have to be allocated to DAS. And that would have shut up basically everyone else in the park from using Lightning Lane. And as it was told to me repeatedly, the ADA guidelines are guidelines, not a suicide pact.
Yeah.
Right? And speaking of ADA guidelines, Jim, would you like to hear some interesting hypotheticals I came up with? Without talking to a single person ever, Jim, about this. Not talking to anyone. Well,
okay.
Completely hypothetical in my head. Are you ready?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hypothetically, Jim. Remember last year when Ticketmaster was in 2022, when Ticketmaster was sued by Taylor Swift fans for not doing enough to prevent bots from buying ADA designated tickets? Hypothetically. Yeah, okay. It happened. Mm-hmm. It happened. Mm-hmm. Hypothetically. Mm-hmm. Just spitballing here. What if Ticketmaster went to the U.S. Department of Justice and said, I thought we couldn't require documentation here. What are we supposed to do? And then hypothetically, because I don't know anything about anything, Jim, right? What if the DOJ said, you know, Ticketmaster, you should totally read the section marked Prevention of Fraud and Purchase of Tickets for Accessible Venues on our ADA requirements website, last updated February 28th, 2020. Again, this is a fever dream. I don't know that this happened, right?
Okay.
And what if Ticketmaster went back to the DOJ and said, could we get some guidance on what you mean when you say venues may take steps to prevent the fraudulent sale and use of accessible seating? Now, hypothetically, right, again, I don't know that this happened. If the DOJ came back and said something like, as long as you have substantial evidence of abuse, like something that shows that people who legitimately need accommodation are being negatively affected by this fraud, and you can show that you are doing it in a minimally intrusive way that gets the job done, you can ask more questions, as long as the end result is that the aforementioned people who legitimately need accommodation are better off at the end, right? But in my head, I say that in way more expensive lawyer speak, of course, right? Okay, so let's say that gets resolved, right? And then hypothetically, Jim, right, if you're a theme park operator with a small army of lawyers, you might approach the DOJ and say, you know, a day in a theme park is a lot like a Taylor Swift concert. There's limited seating per day, and you want to make sure that the special seats go to those who actually need them. Would you agree? That's how I would, just me, I would open my conversation to the DOJ with that. That seems pretty straightforward. Right? Now, if the DOJ would come back and say, but you have proof of this abuse, right? And of course, because if I'm running a theme park, I would be super prepared. And I would say like, oh my God, we have spent untold staff hours counting people in line. We have population analyses that would make the Census Bureau weep with joy. We have disks full of social media posts from click chasers explaining that they said that what they were saying to get a free front of the line pass, but the next day filmed themselves sweating in a yurt during yoga in the desert for 3 hours. Like, is that the kind of proof that you need? Because like, this is like 75% of our line sometimes. In that case, the DOJ might say, you know what? A couple more questions could be useful here. I'm not saying it happened. I'm just saying in my head, that's how I imagine it would go.
Well, there we go. A very interesting head you got going there, Len.
I picked up so many random calls from the 407 area code this week, Jim. All right, one last thing on this, and for anyone who owns Disney stock. I was also on a call with someone going through the likely park ops and financial impacts of this change. And the thought occurred to me on this call that, by the way, I knew this person existed. I had no idea this person knew I existed. But I'm on this call, and the thought occurred to me that if almost 4 out of 5 people in the Lightning Lane line for popular attractions aren't paying for it, then all the extra revenue, Jim, that Parks and Resorts has seen over the last few years has come from just 1 in 5 guests in each Lightning Lane paying for it. And that means, Jim, if these new DAS rules can convince just 1 in 4 of those users to switch to paying for Genie Plus, Disney basically doubles the money it's making from Lightning Lane.
Hadn't we heard that was at least $1 billion?
The number that no one disagrees with, let's put it this way, is 800 million. And I've talked to a bunch of people about this. So if you told me $1 billion, I'd believe $1 billion, sort of like in secondary stuff or whatever. Anyway, so when I was in this call with someone, I said, okay, like the numbers indicate that people who really need DAS are being harmed by waiting in line longer, right? And these changes will fulfill the intent of the ADA guidelines. So on that alone, right, you should make the changes. You should make the changes to do good. And they said, yeah, that's really what we're trying to do. That is literally the intent. And then I said, so the extra $1 billion in profit is just a byproduct you'll have to live with? And Jim, this person laughed and laughed until they coughed. Honest to God, I have never heard anyone at that level of a company laugh that hard in my life. We laughed and laughed and laughed. It was hilarious.
Wow. Okay. Well, all right.
They took it in the spirit it was intended, right? Like, I really do think this is the right move, right? But it's just, if you're looking at
totally. But let's be honest here. It is the right move, but on the same time, it's a right move that Disney has a huge financial incentive to implement.
Right, exactly.
The payoff is huge.
Oh, by the way, I was talking to somebody else, and I was relating this story to them, and they mentioned, and I want to know if you've heard this, that when Imagineering is coming up with their next generation of rides, part of their financial modeling is actually building in the individual Lightning Lane and Genie Plus revenue, which conceivably would allow them to either fund bigger projects or more projects sooner. But like hypothetically, and I don't really know what the number is, but if we're getting like $40 million a year out of Rise of the Resistance and the ride costs $500 million to build, right? Your time frame for profitability is reduced. And also it reduces the risk. Because if you think about how Disney used to make its money back in opening rides, it was like, okay, we're going to spend, $100 million building Splash Mountain. I hope to God the advertising is good enough to get people to book trips so we can make that money back. And now but there's sort of like, that's an indirect way of measuring the success of an individual attraction, right?
Oh, yeah. But at the same time, to sort of circle back to what you mentioned at the top of this segment about DAS, think about, the very thing you just mentioned about, okay, we're going to have to reconfigure the line so there is a way for people to exit from the line, get to a bathroom, and then return to the line without disrupting. And it's just sort of, when you factor in what that's going to mean, that you now have to go to the pre-existing queues for at least all of the most popular attractions of the park and work this in. I mean, it just sort of reminds me of what happened back in the late 1990s, early 2000s when FastPass first came in, and every time they put in a new FastPass, it was $1 million. In fact, it was Bruce Vaughan, the then head, or the now head of Imagineering, who was championing FastPass back in the day, who said, look, yes, it's $1 million. But when you think about, someone isn't waiting in line, which means they're in the shop. They're
getting drinks. They're eating Mickey pretzels. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we are making that money back. Trust me, invest that money.
Yeah, 100%. And this is way easier to measure, so that's good.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
All right, fun things I did this week. 1900 Park Fair has reopened at the Grand Floridian for breakfast and dinner. I went with Christina, who you all know, and our friend Steve on Tuesday. So it's a new location. It moved from the main lobby entrance, has now moved to the entrance next to the Grand Flow Cafe on the first floor. It's one table service credit on the dining plan, or $54 for adults, $34 for kids. Important thing here, no discounts yet. So you're paying full fare. It's very pretty. I think the big change from a layout perspective is they've done these padded sofa booths, but it's a continuous sofa all the way down the middle of the dining area. So instead of all tables, you have this really pretty sort of red couch that extends all the way, virtually the entire length of the room. When you sit down, you're told that the entire premise of the character dining meal, the theme, is on wishing. So you'll be greeted as a wish maker, which is how I am greeted normally anyway. So that's kind of consistent. And each of the characters that you talk to will be focused on talking about your wishes. And then there's a wish ceremony, a lot like the Friendship Day Parade at Crystal Palace, where you'll be encouraged to hold up your wish card as Jiminy Cricket narrates the process. A couple of things made this for me, the characters and the food. The first character we saw was Prince Ali. Interesting thing about Prince Ali, princes are very rarely at character meals, aren't they?
This is usually a female-heavy affair, so yeah.
So I actually had to go back and do some research. The last prince, I believe, discounting Beast, who may or may not be a prince and may or may not count as a character greeting in a venue, right? Yeah, questionable there. But the last legitimate prince who was at a character greeting that I could find was Prince Charming in the same location in 1900 Park Fair back in 2009. So princes are rare. Yeah. Anyway, Prince Ali says that he didn't become a prince because the genie made him one. He became a prince because of his true heart, which was great. And then Cinderella was there in her normal blue gown, but she took the time to show us her slipper, which had a giant diamond on it, on a bow. And I was with Christina, who at that point had tried a couple of the alcoholic drinks that they had. And I only had to restrain Christina lightly from saying, "Put that ankle away, harlot."
Oh, funny. Okay.
I know what you want to say. Don't say it.
Okay.
But my two favorite characters, I think, Mirabelle. Mirabelle is adorable here. She's very upbeat, very, very happy. She twirls, she dances. We dance together for a little bit. She totally focused on the guests. Whoever is playing Mirabelle, I mean, it's really Mirabelle, but whoever's the spirit inside Mirabelle is doing an outstanding job. And the last character that we saw was Tiana, and she's in her safari outfit because she's going out hunting for new spices. And here's the interesting thing. Before we got to talk to Tiana, I found Tiana's handler. And I was like, look, I don't want to make this weird, any more weird than it has to be, right? Does Tiana canonically know about Tiana's Bayou Adventure? Does Tiana at 1900 Park Fair today know that, right down the road, they're building an attraction better? And anyway, it took them 15 minutes to figure out, but they came back, we're like, yes, Tiana knows that Tiana's Bayou Adventure is being built. I'm like, and it kind of led to a really interesting discussion about Tiana in Frontierland, because Tiana is set in the 1920s. So she knows about Tom Sawyer Island because Tom Sawyer was written in 1876, right? And so Tiana knows all about all of the history of Frontierland because everything else in the land happened before 1895. So Jim, if you want to feel old, Tiana knows about Frontierland, what we know today about the year 1990. and while you think about that, listeners, let me just Google Maps real quick, the nearest cliff I can fling myself off of.
Yes, very old. Very old. Okay, so.
Anyway, so onto the food. So the first thing that they'll tell you when you sit down is that there's a full bar. Christy ordered a couple of drinks, just hence the comments to Cinderella. I think this is an excellent character meal. The highlight of the meal for me, they do a carving station with Compart Duroc whole bone-in ham. And Duroc pork is the kind of thing that fancy restaurants serve for dinner. These guys are doing it on a buffet for breakfast, right? They roast it for 3 hours every morning. I had a super interesting conversation with a bunch of people from the food lab. By the way, they were all there. And so they keep the skin on, they lacquer the skin. Christy said it should be the star of the Whoville Who Feast for Christmas or some medieval banquet.
Okay.
It was, and Jim, I had it. It was the best buffet ham I've ever had. And it's that, and I can't think of anything else. It is that good. I was with Steve, and Steve was like, how I judge a buffet is if you blindfolded me and you put the food in my mouth, could I tell it was from a buffet or that it was freshly prepared? And he's like, I couldn't tell the difference here. That was that. And again, we all know that Disney stage manages all of its restaurant openings. So, take this all with a grain of salt, right? The other thing I thought that was super interesting, I'm not a huge fan of tofu, but they do a spiced tofu scramble with veg. And I'm like, if this was at Boma, it would be the thing that everyone would rave about. And the interesting thing, number one, it is extremely flavorful, but I think we started at 8:30, and 45 minutes later, when I tried the tofu scramble a second time, because how stuff sits out on a buffet, it was still moist, even though it had been sitting out. I was like, I don't know how you did this. And they're like, so I went in and talking to the food lab people, they're like, we specifically picked the ingredients so that it would be moist, right? So we intended this. So other things that were good, they do a guava and cream cheese Danish, which is small. Chrissy raved about this. She said it's genius in that it was the ideal thickness for a breakfast dessert. If it was thinner, it would have been just crunchy caramel and fruit. And if it was thicker, it would have just been a cinnamon roll. And so they found the right size. Yeah, Chrissy loved that. They also did a really good croissant breakfast pizza, an excellent beef and potato hash. And Chrissy says here, there's a side of barbecue sauce, Hunter's barbecue sauce on the side with that, and that's what you want with that. And then bread pudding with vanilla creme anglaise and cinnamon pull-apart bread. So that was those were the highlights there.
Oh, sounds like quite the breakfast.
Yeah, the cool thing there was, along with the culinary team from the food lab that was there, there were some culinary people who helped open the Galactic Starcruiser.
Oh, okay.
And speaking of the Starcruiser food, Jim, I said, Jim, speaking of the Starcruiser food.
Yes, Mr. Testa.
Did you know it took the food lab people 3 years to develop the translucent fruit served on the Starcruiser?
I did not know that.
3 years, because when the food lab people told me that, and I told them I was like, look, I was on the very first Starcruiser voyage, and one of the first things I did was go to get something to eat, and I saw the translucent fruit within the first hour I was in the Starcruiser, and I knew right then and there that the $5,000 I paid for that voyage, I was happy just seeing the translucent fruit. Like, that was good enough for me. I told him I walked into that buffet not knowing it was possible. I walked out wondering how I lived my entire life without having it before. It was amazing stuff. Anyway, I will off the record give you some other information.
Okay.
And then in our show notes, folks, Christy has provided tons of photos of the setting and the food. Go ahead and look at those in the show notes. All right, Jim, we have time for listener questions. Let's do a few of those. A lot of people obviously wrote in about DAS changes that we just discussed. Here's some perspective from our listeners, starting with Victoria. And Victoria says, first of all, yes, there's total abuse of the DAS system. I think everyone knows that. However, a lot of the situation seems to be of Disney's own making. They're citing the fact that DAS usage has tripled over the last 5 years. Are they truly ignoring the fact that if you include COVID closures, that increase almost directly correlates with the introduction of Genie Plus? So doesn't it make sense that people are abusing the DAS more because Genie Plus is expensive, not user-friendly, and can barely get you on a couple of rides in a busy day? So, and then, Victoria, expresses her concern about her family members. And I think, again, Victoria, you're not the droids that Disney's looking for in terms of enforcement here. I know that, everybody's a little bit worried here. I think everything's going to turn out fine here. But that is a valid point, right? When you're charging people up to $150 a day for a family of four, some people can be more morally flexible than others.
No. It definitely incentivizes, that sort of behavior. There's just the feeling that Disney is gouging me, so I'm going to gouge Disney. But right. But it comes at a cost of people who legitimately need to use DAS.
No, it's true. Yeah, and that's the thing. You're inconveniencing people who legitimately need the thing. So, okay. Mm-hmm. And then Mike from Edmonton wrote in with this. He said that the big point of interest for me with this update was that Disney said last year that DAS use has tripled over the previous 5 years. And I'm guessing that this increase came from a number of societal factors, as well as some that Disney brought on themselves. So Mike points out that over the last few years, he's heard a number of people who have discovered through social media that they shared characteristics of disability or neuroatypicality from it, and they used that information to get a diagnosis. A lot of those people said how much easier their life would have been if they were diagnosed when they were teens instead of 40. And I note to Mike, I got diagnosed in my 40s, and I agree, my life would have been easier if I had been diagnosed as a kid. Did I ever tell you the story?
No.
So I do my psych eval. This is like 15 years ago, 10 years ago. I do the psych eval, and they do an interview, and you go through a checklist. And at the end of it, my psychiatrist said, okay, the next part is we have to interview your family members to see if they think that you had a display some characteristics of ADD when you were growing up. And so I gave them my psychiatrist, my two sisters, and my brother. And then I go back for my interview, and we're going through her assessment of the tests that I took and our interview together. And she says, and now we come to the part where I did the family interviews. And I'm like, okay. And she said, without judgment, my notes say here that when I asked your twin sister if you exhibited lack of attention and forgetting things when you were growing up, she laughed for 2.5 minutes. And I'm like, are we done here? I mean, okay.
All right.
But the way that she read it, it wasn't like, and she laughed. She said, and my notes say that she laughed for 2.5 minutes.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, here's your prescription. All right. So Mike goes on to say, even though Disney's gutted most of the perks of the FastPass system, the idea of not having to physically wait in line is still pretty enticing. And I blame this on Lightning Lanes and Disney's oops, all e-ticket development approach to inflate the line well beyond what would have been reasonable. And I mention that because anytime a listener writes in with a reference to Captain Crunch, in this case, oops, all crunch berries, I'm going to put that letter in the show.
There we go. Right there. Oops, all right. Ticket.
And then the last one, Eric writes in and says, overinflated wait times have been mostly attributed to Genie Plus and individual Lightning Lane sales, but thinking through the recent DAS changes in response to abuse, I'm wondering how much of the fluctuations we see in wait times over the last couple of years can also be linked back to DAS use, at least in part, because artificially increasing a posted wait time would also increase the DAS virtual wait time and decrease the DAS usage rate, especially in aggregate. That's interesting. So one of the things that we're going to have to do, Jim, once May 20th rolls around, is we're basically going to have to go back and recount the number of people getting in these lines to see how it affects the standby wait. And that's going to be super interesting.
I agree. And again, just to circle back to something that you said, in the DAS segment, look, change is hard and change is sometimes scary. But more to the point, if this makes it that much easier for a family with a kid with autism to enjoy their Walt Disney World vacation, I have to say, I'm willing to get behind this.
Yeah. And I think, again, just looking at the trends, there was no way that we could have sustained this another year.
Oh, no.
We'll see what happens. But I think, in general, I would say, again, change is scary. Change is hard. Don't freak out about this yet. Disney still has to release a whole bunch of details. Let's see how that happens. But I am confident that they've gone through this process a million times in review, and it's going to be as minimally intrusive as it can be. So, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, Jim continues the story of how Walt Disney World's Tomorrowland came to be. We'll be right back.
April's that month whether, like it or not, you have to stop and take stock of your finances. The Internal Revenue Service is kind of insistent when it comes to this particular matter. And for a lot of us, managing our money isn't much fun. Having to keep track of our income and outgo gets to be a bit of a grind, which is why I am so happy that I started making use of Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. And what I like best about Rocket Money is, well, it's like I've now got a computerized concierge when it comes to my cash. And with this personal finance app, I've now got access to neat features like Rocket Money's dashboard, which allows me to quickly compare this month's spending to last month's, which then gives me some real insight when it comes to my spending habits. Which reminds me, I really need to cut back on the number of books that I've been ordering from Amazon. Mind you, I'm not the only one who's now taking advantage of this fresh, new way to manage my money. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. That's rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish one more time for those poor postal workers who then have to deal with people like me who mail their tax returns at the very last moment. rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. We thank them for sponsoring today's show. Walt Disney once said that for every laugh there should be a tear, which is why, I think anyway, he would have loved Drawn to Life, that hugely entertaining, surprising and emotional spectacle that's now being presented live on stage at Disney Springs in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Presented by Cirque du Soleil and Disney, this is a show that I can guarantee you will captivate audiences of all ages. I saw this show during a recent trip to Walt Disney World, and let me tell you, I'm ready to go see it again right now. Drawn to Life is filled with breathtaking acrobatics, stunning visuals, and heartwarming storytelling. The creative geniuses behind Cirque du Soleil and Walt Disney Animation Studios have come together to create this show where imagination literally knows no bounds. Filled with dazzling performances, not to mention beloved Disney characters coming to life in ways you've only just dreamed about, Drawn to Life is a must-see, family-friendly spectacle that will leave you, well, in awe. So don't miss out on your chance to be part of the magic. Plan your visit to Disney Springs today and reserve your seats for Drawn to Life by Cirque du Soleil and Disney, live on stage. Set your imagination in motion.
All right, Jim, we left off last week where it was, 1972, and Disney had paused development of other attractions for a couple of reasons, right?
Yeah, crucial to sort of reinforce here. The last thing on the Tomorrowland side of the park that opened would have been If You Had Wings. That opens in June of 72. And then there is this more than 2.5-year-long lag between that opening and then on November of 74, we see the Starjets open. But then inside of an 8-month-long period, we see Space Mountain and Carousel Progress, which had come out from California. That opens. And then after that, we get the redo of Flight to the Moon, which now becomes Mission to Mars. And then finally, in July of that year, we get People Mover finally opening. So it's just fascinating. Well, what happened there? I mean, why would there have been a 2+ year lag be in the expansion of Tomorrowland? And to put this kind of in perspective, Len, there's been a lot of talk lately, obviously, about the Beyond Big Thunder project, which is supposed to transform the Magic Kingdom in Florida. And Len, I am old enough to remember when there wasn't a Magic Kingdom.
Wow. You remember a world without Disney World?
Back when this was just General Joe Potter out there, building canals, in swampland in Central Florida. And by the way, if in the late 60s you wanted to know what Disney was up to in Florida, you taped 2 quarters to a piece of cardboard, put it in an envelope, sent it to Walt Disney Productions, and a few weeks later you got back a copy of this beautiful 24-page booklet called The Preview Edition of Walt Disney World, the Vacation Kingdom of the World.
Oh, was it glorious 1960s, 1970s art?
Oh, totally. But more to the point, it was written in 69, published in early 70s, very prized today by Disney and a collectors. Now, mind you, within the past 10 years, D23 did a reprint and gave away copies of the preview guide at one of his events. So you can get your hands on it. But I bring up this booklet today because, again, on last week's show, we're talking about the plans for Tomorrowland. And where this all gets interesting is that anyone who bought a Disneyland souvenir map during the late 60s, early 70s knows that Space Mountain had been part of the plan for that park. They had it there on the souvenir map. You knew it was coming. Interesting thing is that, got to talk with John Hench about this once, and he talked about how Space Mountain had been in the works since 64. They were looking at redoing the Tomorrowland at Disneyland, which is, as we mentioned on earlier Disney Dishes this year, was built quickly, was built on the cheap. And, the idea was, well, what if we redo Tomorrowland as a spaceport? And the notion is that all the vehicles flying around in and out of the building are vehicles coming to the sport. But Space Mountain wasn't just being considered for Disneyland. It was also being considered, it was on the books for Florida. Sure. By the way, here's a quote straight out of the preview guide. Later in Phase 1's master plan, Tomorrowland will present the spectacular Space Mountain. 20 stories tall, inside guests can pilot space vehicles on a thrilling journey. The important word in that description, Len, Phase 1.
Phase 1. Yeah, okay.
Phase 1. Okay. So according to Don Tatum, the then president of Walt Disney Productions, Phase 1 of Project Florida was that piece of the Central Florida swampland that the company was transforming into. And again, this is how cold-blooded they were back in the day. It's an Disney World was an outdoor recreation attraction. And to be specific, the parcel of land that Disney was developing centered around Bay Lake and stretched 3 miles from east to west and over 2 miles north and south, with Disney World Phase 1, which again centered on the creation of a destination vacation resort. It's more than 2,500 acres and includes an endless variety of activities centered around Bay Lake, Seven Seas Lagoon, and the resort hotels. But Len, Phase 1 was only supposed to last from October of 71 through the fall of 76, and was actually supposed to conclude with the end of the summer of 76, which, again, America would have been wrapping up its bicentennial celebration.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. All right.
So what's interesting, circling back to Beyond Big Thunder, what was interesting is Phase 1 would have ended with a project I like to call Above Frontierland.
Oh, I think I know where you're going here. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so, and again, this is a description right out of the preview guide. Another major attraction to be added during Walt Disney World's Phase 1 is Thunder Mesa, which will tower over dense pine forests, offering a spectacular panoramic view of Frontierland. Resembling a tabletop mountain typical of those found in southwestern deserts, this attraction will include a Pueblo-style village and a series of exciting adventures. Inside Thunder Mesa, guests can sign aboard the Western River Expedition, a musical parody of the Wild Old West, and on their cruise they'll come face-to-face with cowboys and Indians in a frontier fantasy on the grand scale of Disneyland's famous Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, here's the thing, Len. Thunder Mesa was genuinely supposed to be huge. It was supposed to be 3/4 of the height of Cinderella Castle. That, by the way, that's 183 feet tall. So if we're talking about a structure at the back of Frontierland, that would have been 140 feet tall. And again, just 44 feet shorter than the contemporary. And if you stood on that tabletop mountain in the Pueblo Village and looked out across the park, you could have seen over the trees out onto Seven Seas Lagoon and had this great panoramic view of the Poly and the contemporary.
Wow.
Now, just as sort of a little side color here, this past weekend, Len, Heritage held one of its latest Art of Disneyland auctions.
Yeah, I got priced out of some Mary Blair art pretty quickly there.
Yeah.
And we have a number of friends that also were bidding on things, yeah.
Yeah, 18,000 items up this weekend. But the thing for me that fascinated me was that a number of these pieces, in fact, I think a bunch of the Mary Blairs did, in fact, come from Mark and Alice Davis's estate.
Yeah.
And by the way, because you got priced out, Len, this was the highest earning Art of Disneyland auction that Heritage has ever done. I want to say they got $3.6 million in bids.
Oh,
but
that's a lot. Yeah.
Okay, anyway, the reason I bring up this auction as part of today's show is one of the pieces that came up for bid was an early sitemap for the Magic Kingdom. One that WDI had done at 69 or thereabouts that not only showed where Thunder Mesa was supposed to be built, but also pinpointed a number of ever-built Fantasyland attractions like the Magic Kingdom's Headless Horseman attraction.
I've never heard of this.
It was literally supposed to be the piece of connective tissue. Picture, instead of Peter Pan Flight being where it is, you're headed down to Liberty Square, making your way towards the Haunted Mansion. And across the street from Small World is the Headless Horseman ride.
And that would make sense because contextually that happened in New York, right?
There we go. You're not wrong. Sleepy Hollow, Tarrytown, all of that. Yes, it would have fit in with the aesthetic and the storytelling that was going on at Liberty Square. And always been a heartbreaker that one never happened. Anyway, just throwing this out there because I know we have listeners who were, in fact, friends reached out about this auction and said, "Did you know what's going on?" Somebody got a hold of that map, and if they want to,
I think we both know who that might be. By the way,
there we go.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and if they want to share the images with myself and Len, we'd love to see it. Okay,
I've already had that conversation. It's fine.
Cool.
We're taken care of. It's good.
Good. Okay, now, we talked at length about Phase 1 of Project Florida. Now, what was supposed to have happened in Phase 2? Don Tatum, in his comments again in the preview guide, stated that beyond Phase 1, we have additional projects and concepts on the boards for many years to come, but chief among these was Epcot the City, which, again, quoting directly from the guide, and so, again, remember, this is the thinking as of 69. It's a fully operating community of 20,000. And Tatum isn't vague about this land. He's, it's very, very clear that Phase 1 Vacation Complex represents the first 5 years of the Walt Disney World project. And the notion is, as soon as that is up and running, as soon as we open Thunder Mesa, we pivot to building Epcot the City, which will give people the opportunity, again, direct quote here, to live a life they can't find anywhere else in the world today. Now, to bring things full circle here, again, bringing us back to A Few Had Wings opening in June of 72, and that gulf of time between when Starjets opens in November of 74, they pretty much figured out what they're doing with Phase 1.
Sure.
On the other hand, Phase 2 is a challenge to the Imagineers, because think about this. You have to finish building out Tomorrowland at the Magic Kingdom, but at the same time, you have to do a significant amount of work on Epcot the City, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow.
Which is also looking into the future in a technological way. So there's a lot of thematic overlap there, or potential for it.
That's it exactly, that there's only so much future to go around. You know, and so it was John Hench who was telling me that this really came to a boil when they decided they were going to build the Walt Disney World Showcase in the, and this is early 70s, mind, in the parking lot of the Magic Kingdom. Now, I prior to starting today's show, folks, I sent Len 3 pieces of art of the Walt Disney World Showcase, which the idea was it was going to be this outdoor venue where you could visit upwards of 35 different nations, sample their culture, see attractions, entertainment shows. Len, you've looked at the art. What does that stuff look like?
Well, so it's got in the upper left corner, there's a monorail going through it, like you would see, in Epcot's Future World today. But the rest of it is very Tomorrowland-y. I gotta say, it looks a lot like Tomorrow. I mean, the plants, the building architecture, the 2-story parts of it, and also like in the 70s, 60s, 70s, they had the modern architecture had that sort of like 30-degree angle slope concrete support. Yeah, a lot of that.
Okay, and you've nailed it in one. In fact, John Hench was telling me once, it said, well, what made him crazy, and to get wrong, his good friend Claude Coates is working on this project, but John is looking at the big picture, and it's like Tomorrowland over the Magic Kingdom, and what we need to do with Epcot the City, and now what we're doing with Walt Disney World Showcase, and he likened it to opening an ice cream parlor and then putting vanilla ice cream next to French vanilla next to vanilla bean. And it's just sort of like, look, it's all ice cream. We all love ice cream, but we also want a little variety it comes to flavor.
That's the problem. By the way, is this a first piece of concept art? Is this a John Hench?
No, I want to say these are Colin Campbell.
Oh, okay. So his style is remarkably like John's.
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's very good. It's a great piece of concept art.
Oh, and by the way, before we close out the feature here, I want to note that just in the last couple of days, we lost Dan Gouzet, who
I saw.
If you've ever seen any of the concept paintings that were done for Euro Disneyland, whether it was Adventure Isle or Phantom Manor, or for that matter, the amazing piece that Dan did for the Tower of Terror for Tokyo Disney Seas.
Yeah.
This guy was a master. And, much like Colin, and, it could create these paintings that made you think, the sort of thing you'd carry into a meeting and put it in front of Michael Eisner, and he said, shut up and take my money. Just go, go build that. So, and speaking of go build that, okay, so here the Imagineers trying to figure out, how much future to spend in Tomorrowland but to save for Epcot the City, when in October of 72, the Mattel Corporation announces that it's going to be spending $60 million on a theme park that celebrates the circus that's going to be located just 10 miles down the road from the Magic Kingdom, which blew Disney's carefully calibrated plans for Phase 1 and Phase 2 of Project Florida straight out of the water.
Ugh.
And next week, in the third and final installment of the series, we'll discuss specifically why Circus World scared the absolute crap out of the folks back in Burbank.
I believe it. Wow. That's a great story. I didn't know half this stuff. That's fantastic.
It kind of breaks my heart to look at all of those pieces that went out the door at Heritage this past week. But there's some amazing pieces.
The one sad thing about it is that a single collection got broken up into thousands of pieces. The upside is there's stuff there that the public never would have seen otherwise. So hopefully we can get some of it online.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. Also, we should do a show on the Headless Horseman attraction because I've never heard of it. I think if there's any sort of concept information about it, I'd love to hear it.
Same thing here. All right.
Let's do it around Halloween. Let's do it for Halloween. We'll do it around Halloween, which is technically August in Walt Disney World. So, you got time.
There we go. We got a big window. All right.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for the show today. You can help support our show by subscribing over at Jim Hill Media, where we're posting exclusive shows every week. Our most recent show came out last week and is on how all the Buzz Lightyear attractions around the world got made. Check it out at patreon.com/Jim Hill Media. On next week's show, Jim finishes up the history of Walt Disney World's Tomorrowland. Also, this week, Michelin announces its awards for Florida restaurants this coming Thursday, April 18th. So good luck to all of our friends in Disney's culinary staff, including Israel and his team over at Victoria and Albert's. You can find more of Jim at jimhillmedia.com and more of me, Len, at touringplans.com. We're produced spectacularly by Eric Hersey. He'll be wearing his concert tee from the Heaven Up Here tour to see Echo and the Bunnymen on their Songs to Learn and Sing tour on Thursday, May 16th at 7 p.m. at the 930 Club in beautiful downtown Washington, D.C. While Eric's doing that, please go into iTunes and rate our show and tell us what you'd like to hear next. For Jim, this is Len. We'll see you on the next show.